My name is Alina, and I never expected a simple family dinner in Lansing, Michigan to break every illusion I had about my life. I sat there at that pristine dining table, trying to ignore the sting of old memories that clawed at the back of my throat, when my mom leaned forward, set her wine glass down with deliberate precision, and told me I wasn't even half the woman my sister was. Her words didn't just cut, they reopened every wound she'd carved into me since childhood, every scar she'd left festering beneath my skin, every moment of doubt she'd planted in my mind like poison seeds. But what none of them expected was how I'd respond. What they couldn't have predicted was that on that particular night, something inside me had already begun to shatter in a way that would never be put back together the same way again. I pushed my chair back, the sound of wood scraping against hardwood echoing through that sterile dining room, and told her something that made my dad go pale, made the color drain from his face like water through cupped hands. And when he asked what I meant, when those words finally left his trembling lips, everything in that house snapped apart. The facade crumbled. The perfect family portrait shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. If you've ever been blindsided by your own family, if you've ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet while sitting at your childhood table, you'll want to stay with me. Subscribe now before you forget. Stories like this hit harder when you're prepared, when you've already committed to seeing them through to their bitter, ugly end. And if you don't subscribe, at least comment why you won't. I'm curious what stops people from wanting to witness someone else's pain, someone else's resurrection. Dinner at my parents' house always felt like stepping into a staged play, some carefully choreographed performance where everyone knew their lines except me. A spotless table that gleamed under expensive lighting. Forced smiles that never quite reached anyone's eyes. My sister Vanessa glowing under the soft kitchen lights like she was born to stand in that exact spot, in that exact way, forever the golden child who could do no wrong. Everyone pretending nothing was wrong, except the air always told a different story, thick and suffocating with unspoken resentments and barely concealed contempt. On that night, the tension felt heavy enough to taste, metallic and bitter on my tongue. My mom waited until the plates were full, until everyone had settled into their seats and there was no easy escape, then humiliated me in front of everyone with a single sentence. Her voice didn't shake. It was steady, practiced, like she'd been rehearsing this particular cruelty for weeks. Mine almost did. Almost betrayed the tremor building in my chest, the tears burning behind my eyes that I refused to let fall. "You know, Alina," she said, swirling her wine like she was discussing the weather, "Vanessa just got another promotion. Director of marketing now. At 28. I keep telling people I have 2 daughters, but honestly, you're not even half the woman your sister is." The silence that followed was deafening. My sister Vanessa stared at her hands, picking at her cuticles, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. My dad stared at his plate, pushing food around like a child who'd been caught in the middle of something he didn't understand. No one defended me. No one ever did. Not once in 26 years had anyone in that house stood up and said, "That's enough. Stop treating her like this." I excused myself to the bathroom, walked calmly across the spotless tiles, shut the door quietly behind me, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My cheeks burned crimson with shame. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. It wasn't just the insult, it was how normal it felt for them to tear me down, how routine this had become, how I'd been conditioned to accept this as my role in the family dynamic. But as I stood there, gripping the cold porcelain sink until my knuckles turned white, I remembered something my grandmother once whispered to me before she passed, her papery hand clutching mine in that hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and death. "The day they push you too far is the day you'll finally rise, sweetheart. You're stronger than all of them combined. They know it. That's why they try so hard to break you." Something shifted inside me in that moment, something fundamental and irreversible. A vow formed in the depths of my rage and humiliation. A quiet promise that echoed through every cell of my body, never again. And right at that breaking point, let me ask you something. If you've ever stood alone in a room full of your own family, If you've ever felt invisible while surrounded by the people who are supposed to love you most, drop a comment. You're not the only one. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're simply human, and you deserve better than what they've given you. I moved out the very next week. No goodbyes. No explanations. No dramatic confrontation or tearful farewell. Just silence. I packed my belongings into garbage bags and cardboard boxes while they were out, loaded everything into my beat-up Honda, and disappeared from their lives like smoke dissolving into air. Life didn't magically get better just because I'd made a bold decision. That's not how any of this works. The real world doesn't care about your emotional breakthroughs or your newfound determination. I took low-paying jobs across Grand Rapids, whatever I could find that would keep me fed and housed. I worked night shifts at a 24-hour diner where drunk college kids came in at 3 a.m. demanding pancakes and treating me like I was invisible. I studied business on borrowed laptops at the public library, squinting at screens in the harsh fluorescent lighting, teaching myself everything my family said I was too stupid to learn. Every time I felt like giving up, and God, there were so many times I wanted to give up, I heard my mom's voice telling me I'd never measure up, that I was wasting my time, that I should just come crawling back and accept my place as the family disappointment. And every time I heard that voice, it fueled something dark and determined inside me. Spite became my greatest motivator. Rage became my energy source. Rejection became normal, just another part of my daily routine. Doors closed in my face. Opportunities slipped through my fingers like water. Job applications went unanswered. Business pitches were met with polite disinterest or outright laughter. But I kept going. I kept showing up. I kept trying even when everything inside me screamed that it was pointless, that my mother was right, that I should just accept my mediocrity and stop fighting so hard against the inevitable. Then, one night around 2 a.m., hunched over that borrowed laptop in my studio apartment that smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking, a tiny breakthrough landed in my inbox. A small client offering me a chance to rebuild their marketing strategy. They couldn't afford a real agency. They were desperate. They were willing to take a chance on someone with more determination than credentials. That single email changed everything, split my life into before and after. From one client came 5. I threw myself into their projects like my life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. I worked 16-hour days. I skipped meals. I forgot what sleep felt like. From 5 clients came a stream, an actual steady flow of work that paid not just my rent, but started building something that looked like a future. Then partnerships began to form. Then growth became undeniable. Then I had to start saying no to projects because I literally didn't have enough hours in the day. I didn't attend birthdays anymore. I didn't answer calls from my parents or my sister when they rang every few months, probably out of obligation more than genuine concern. I turned myself into a ghost, deliberately erasing myself from their narrative. Let them wonder. Let them tell their friends that their troubled daughter had finally disappeared for good. Let them write me off completely. And right when the momentum started to build, when I could finally see the outline of something real taking shape, let me pause and say this. If you're watching this and you're grinding in silence too, if you're working jobs that nobody respects while building something nobody believes in, subscribe, because you shouldn't have to climb alone. Because I know what it feels like to have no one in your corner, and I'm telling you right now that you can make it. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But you can absolutely make it. Momentum continued building like a freight train. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Failure became fuel instead of a reason to quit. Every setback taught me something. Every rejection sharpened my skills. Every moment of doubt pushed me to work harder, to be smarter, to prove that I wasn't the worthless daughter they'd always treated me as. Until eventually, slowly, undeniably, I wasn't struggling anymore. I wasn't barely surviving. I was actually, genuinely building something that mattered. For years later, I walked into my own downtown office. Bright windows overlooking the Grand River, clean lines and modern furniture, quiet confidence radiating from every carefully chosen detail. My business wasn't just stable. It was thriving in ways I'd never allowed myself to imagine during those dark nights in my studio apartment. I had employees now, actual human beings who depended on me for their livelihoods and respected me for my expertise. I had partnerships with companies that my family would have never believed I could even get a meeting with, let alone sign contracts with. I had revenue that would have made my father's jaw drop if he'd known the numbers. I didn't brag about any of it. I didn't post carefully curated success photos on social media. I didn't flaunt anything or send subtle messages designed to reach my family through mutual acquaintances. I simply built, quietly and relentlessly, brick by brick, creating something solid that nobody could take away from me or diminish with their cruel words. Sometimes I'd sit in my office late at night after everyone else had gone home, lights dimmed, the city glowing beyond my windows, knowing with absolute certainty that one day my family would need something from me. They always did. People who build their lives on maintaining control and superiority always eventually need something from the people they've tried to crush. It was only a matter of time. And when that moment came, I wanted to be ready. I wanted to be powerful enough that they'd have no choice but to acknowledge what I'd become. Before the next twist hits, before this story takes the turn that changed everything, you might want to subscribe now. Stories like this move fast, and real life moves even faster. Miss one piece, and you'll be lost when the confrontation finally comes, when years of silence and resentment finally collide with desperate need. I waited, patient, quiet, ready, building my empire while they lived in blissful ignorance, still probably telling people at dinner parties about their successful daughter Vanessa, and conveniently forgetting to mention they had another daughter at all. The first crack came through a voicemail from my father that arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice shook, genuinely shook in a way I'd never heard before, not even at his own mother's funeral, as he asked me to call him back. Something in his tone sounded off, wrong in a fundamental way that made my stomach twist. Desperate, frightened, small. I didn't call back immediately. I sat with that voicemail for hours, listening to it over and over, analyzing every tremor in his voice, every pause, every breath. What could make a man who'd spent his entire life projecting strength and certainty sound so utterly defeated? Later that week, my sister reached out too, sending a long text message apologizing for being distant and hoping we could reconnect as sisters. That alone made alarm bells ring in my head. Vanessa had never once in 4 years reached out to me. Not on my birthday. Not on holidays. Not when I'd sent her a brief message congratulating her on her wedding. The golden child didn't need the scapegoat unless something had gone terribly wrong. Then came the truth piece by piece, extracted through careful questions and reluctant admissions. My parents were drowning. Their mortgage was months behind, and the bank was beginning foreclosure proceedings. Their savings were gone, completely depleted. My mother's schemes, her constant need to project wealth and status she didn't actually have, had finally caught up with her. The credit cards maxed out to maintain appearances. The loans taken against the house to fund Vanessa's dream wedding. The investments in get-rich-quick schemes that promised returns that never materialized. They didn't tell me the full story at first, of course. They tried to minimize, to spin it as a temporary cash flow problem that any successful family might encounter. But I already knew more than they realized. I had found the documents years earlier, hidden in my father's home office when I'd gone back one last time to collect some childhood belongings they'd been holding hostage. I knew whose name my mother had used to open credit accounts she never intended to pay. I knew about the debts she'd accumulated in my name when I was 18 and too naive to understand what she was doing. Debts I'd spent 3 years secretly paying off while working those night shifts at the diner. That was the moment the story sharpened into something that had been inevitable all along. And I need to ask you something. Would you help them? If your family had treated you like garbage for your entire life, made you feel worthless and small, then came crawling back when they needed money, would you help them? Or would you let them sink? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where the line is between justice and cruelty, between boundaries and revenge. Finally, after weeks of increasingly desperate messages, they asked to meet. Not at their home, where they'd once held all the power, and I'd been forced to absorb their contempt over perfectly arranged dinner tables. At my office. On my territory. In the space I'd built with my own hands and my own determination. Perfect. My mother walked into my office like she owned it, chin up, shoulders back, that same imperious expression she'd always worn when demanding things from me. But the performance crumbled the moment the door closed behind her, and she realized she was no longer in control of this narrative. The room's silence exposed the power shift instantly and completely. She sat across from me at my conference table. The same table where I'd closed deals worth more than their house, where I'd negotiated contracts with people who actually respected my intelligence and abilities. Uncomfortable. Small for the first time in her life. My father sat beside her, and he looked like he'd aged a decade in the 4 years since I'd seen him. Vanessa sat at the end, her perfect composure finally cracking around the edges. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I didn't accuse them or unleash the years of pent-up rage that lived in my chest like a caged animal. I simply laid the paperwork on the desk in front of them, each page carefully organized and documented. The forged signatures on credit applications. The secret payments I'd been making on debts she'd created in my name. The lies she'd built her pride and status upon. The facade that was finally crumbling around her. My mother's face broke. The mask slipped completely, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. My dad's hands shook as he reached for the documents, reading through them with growing horror. Vanessa cried silently, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, finally understanding the cruelty she'd been complicit in through her silence all these years. And then I told them, calmly, with a steady voice that betrayed none of the fire burning in my chest, about the night at dinner 4 years ago. About the humiliation. About standing in their bathroom staring at my reflection and making a vow that I would never let them hurt me again. About every sleepless night I'd spent building something they said I was too incompetent to create. About every moment of doubt I'd pushed through while they lived in ignorant comfort, never once wondering if I was okay, if I was eating, if I had a place to sleep. This time they listened. They had no choice but to listen because they needed something from me, and we all knew it. And with tension at its absolute peak, with my mother's tears and my father's shame filling the air between us, I need you to do something. If you've stayed this long, if you've made it through this entire story to reach this moment of confrontation, subscribe now. You don't want to miss what happens next, what choice I made, whether I chose revenge or something more complicated than that simple word could ever capture. My mother begged. The woman who had spent 26 years making me feel worthless actually begged, her voice breaking on words she'd probably never had to say before in her life. Please. Sorry. Desperate. Words that tasted like ash in her mouth. My father apologized, really apologized, not the performative apologies he'd given when he was trying to smooth things over at family gatherings. He looked at me with genuine remorse and said, I should have protected you. I should have stood up to her. I was a coward, and you paid the price for my weakness. My sister tried to translate the grief in the room into something softer, more palatable. She wanted me to forgive, to let it go, to remember that we were family and family forgives. But that's easy to say when you were never the one being torn apart. But I didn't waver. I'd had 4 years to think about this moment, to imagine every possible version of this conversation. I'd rehearsed my response 1,000 times in my head during sleepless nights and long drives and quiet mornings before the rest of the world woke up. I made my choice, not revenge, because revenge would have meant becoming like them, letting their cruelty twist me into something equally ugly. Not forgiveness either, because forgiveness without accountability is just enabling abuse to continue. Something else entirely. Something harder and more complex than either of those clean, simple options. I agreed to help stabilize things professionally. I would work with them to create legal channels for repaying the debts. Structured payment plans they could actually maintain. Full transparency about every dollar, every decision, every step of the process. No more secrets. No more manipulation. No more using people as pawns in whatever game my mother was playing to maintain her image. But emotionally, I walked away. I told them clearly, firmly, without room for negotiation, that I would not be attending family dinners. I would not be playing the role of grateful, forgiven daughter who pretends the past never happened. I would not be giving my mother the satisfaction of thinking that throwing money at a problem could erase decades of emotional abuse. They could have my professional expertise because I'm not cruel enough to watch anyone lose their home, not even people who hurt me. But they couldn't have my heart. That was no longer available to them. That door had closed, and no amount of tears or apologies could pry it back open. And with that emotional pivot, that complicated choice that was neither wholly generous nor wholly vindictive, I need to know something. If you wouldn't have helped them at all, if you think I was too soft and they deserve to lose everything, comment "no chance" below. Because I genuinely don't know if I made the right choice. I still don't know if showing them mercy made me strong or just repeated the pattern of letting them use me. When I left the office that day, walking out into the cold air of downtown Grand Rapids, everything felt different. Lighter, somehow, despite the weight of what had just transpired. The December wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. For the first time in my life, in my entire life, I wasn't defined by their expectations. I wasn't the lesser daughter. I wasn't the emotional punching bag who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction so they could maintain their illusion of being a perfect family. I wasn't the scapegoat or the failure or the disappointment. I had risen without them, succeeded without their support or approval, or even their belief that I was capable of anything beyond mediocrity, and faced them without fear, without the trembling hands and burning cheeks of that girl who'd stood in their bathroom for years ago wondering if maybe they were right about her. The wound that once controlled me, that defined every decision I made and every risk I was too afraid to take, became the story that pushed me forward. The pain became fuel. The rejection became motivation. The cruelty became the foundation upon which I built something they never imagined I could create. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you'd never measure up or that you're not smart enough or strong enough or worthy enough, remember this. The people who try to break you are often the ones who fear how powerful you'll become once you stand alone. They see something in you that terrifies them, some potential that threatens their sense of superiority, and they try to crush it before it can bloom into something they can't control. My mother didn't tell me I was half the woman my sister was because she believed it. She said it because she was terrified I might actually become everything she pretended to be. Successful, independent, powerful in ways that didn't require diminishing other people to maintain. If this resonated with you, if any part of this story echoed something in your own life, subscribe. Or tell me why you won't, because I'm genuinely curious what stops people from committing to seeing someone else's journey through to its conclusion. Either way, don't disappear. Don't close this tab and forget about what you felt while listening to my story. Not when your own rise might be next. Not when you might be one decision away from your own breaking point, your own bathroom mirror moment, your own vow that changes everything. Not when the person who's been trying to break you might be about to realize just how badly they've miscalculated your strength. Your story doesn't end with their cruelty. It begins there. And what you build in the aftermath of that pain is entirely up to you.